Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this A&P live stream. I'm your host, Adam Noyes, and welcome to AN Productions, the channel where we talk about military history, film history, and history in general. Today, we are discussing film history. I was not expecting my video on War of the Gargantuas to blow up like it did, or to get as many views and as many questions as I did. So I decided let's just do a quick Q&A. And I'll answer a lot of the questions that, came up within the comments on that, as well as just have a fun discussion about everything, kaiju related and everything like that. I know today is Sunday, December 7th. I know today's the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. I did originally want to do a discussion of not just Pearl Harbor, but the Pacific War in general for a December live stream, but unfortunately, my guest had to pull out, so I didn't want to be left hanging on that, and I decided I want to talk about something that I know a little bit more about in the immediate. Well, this provided me an opportunity to do so. Also, Merry Christmas, everybody. It's December. I can't believe how fast this year has gone by. Not saying it was a good year. I don't think I achieved any of my resolutions this year, which is unfortunate, but hey, there's always next year. But Merry Christmas, everybody. I hope everybody's having a good time. Some big announcements coming to AN Productions a little bit later, come January. In fact, there's a little teaser of them if you scroll through my YouTube channel right now and check out some of my other channels. You will see that there's a little teaser of things kind of to come. There's going to be a lot of sort of shifting around here, so on and so forth. When it comes to AN Productions and which way it goes, especially because the main channel, which is what this is going on, is now exclusively history-related content. Now exclusively that. And this is film history, so it goes on this channel. Now, I am very tired. So I got a monster here, and I'm going to put it in my coffee cup because, I'm a fancy piece of white trash. And we will go from there. I gotta tell you, I haven't been feeling the Christmas spirit this year. I've got my Christmas lights up. You can see them behind me, and everything like that. Yeah, you can see the Christmas lights up and everything behind me, and I actually have a small little Christmas tree over here. But I haven't even really been listening to, like, any Christmas music. And usually, like, I'm all over it. Which is really funny, because Halloween, I was all over that. Halloween this year, I was really in the mood for Halloween. And I watched a lot. I watched, and I promise this relates to the topic that we're going to discuss today, but the thing that I did this Halloween season was I decided I was going to watch all of the Universal Frankenstein movies, and I was going to rewatch all of the Hammer Frankenstein movies. So it was just the year of Frankenstein for me, I guess. And I did just that. And then when that was done, I decided I was going to watch the two Toho Frankenstein movies, which was Frankenstein Conquers the World and what would turn into War of the Gargantuas. And I hadn't seen War of the Gargantuas in probably about a decade. I think the last time I watched it was in prep for a chat I did with Gorizard about, I think it was our top 10 favorite kaiju movies of all time. And in that video, I think it's still available on this YouTube channel, actually, or at least it was. I named War of the Gargantuas as the best non-Godzilla kaiju movie ever. In that it is one of the quintessential kaiju films ever made. But then I never watched it again. I don't know why. There was no reason as to why I didn't watch it again. I just sort of fell off with it. So I hadn't seen it in a long time. So it was a joy sitting down to watch it again. especially because I have the Toho what is it called, the Toho 1080p restoration, that is absolutely gorgeous. It's a little flat, but it's beautiful to look at. Leaps and bounds better than the other media that I had of it, which was the classic media DVD, which the UPA print looks just fine, but the Japanese print looks like garbage. It looks like utter garbage. And so it was a total treat. And as I was sitting down there watching it, and again, I was watching the Japanese version, of course, I was totally blown away by it again. It was almost like I was watching it for the first time all over again. And I left the movie being like, yeah, I stand by that opinion. I think, other than Godzilla, I think this is the quintessential kaiju film. It's everything that we want in a kaiju film, you know? It's very simple. The monsters themselves are the actual characters. And it doesn't overstay its welcome. You know, it's got some really great kind of cheesy special effects in several sequences that are also still unbelievably impressive. And I think having the monsters be about half the size of Godzilla really allowed for a lot of intricate detail when it came to the special effects themselves, right? Even if the tank scaling is all over the place in this movie. Sometimes they are, you know, barely the size of Gyra's hand, and other times they're bigger than an entire house. So that's always been something that kind of drove me nuts about this movie. But it also made me go back and want to watch the altered cut, the UPA cut, because what I did know about War of the Gargantuas is a version that was available on YouTube, the version that was being streamed over here, and that was the horribly dubbed version of the international dub version, which seems to be the only version of the movie available over here. Not even the original Japanese language, it's the dub version that seems to be everywhere right now. And this was done by a Hong Kong company. I believe it was the same Hong Kong company that would do the dub for Gigan, Godzilla vs. Gigan, Hedorah, Megalon, Mechagodzilla, and Terror of Mechagodzilla. It wasn't Frontier. And you see, this is something I learned actually doing research for that video. And actually, I learned even more about it through some of the comments that I got. That Frontier and the people that made the Frontier dubs and those Hong Kong dubs were two different things. So the Hong Kong company, who's primarily known for their Shaw Brothers, for dubbing a lot of the Shaw Brothers films, did this international dub for War of the Gargantuas. And it is awful. It is beyond terrible. The print is terrible. Everything about that version of the movie is god-awful. And it really irks me that that is the version that's available. If the Japanese version, right, with the original Japanese language, with English subtitles was available, I would still say you're alienating a huge chunk of your audience. But that is a much superior version of the movie than the one with that horrible dub. So I just don't understand the decision there. I just don't. For those of you who are curious, to name some of the movies that the Frontier dub, Frontier was I believe his name was William Ross. To name some of the movies that they dubbed, I believe they dubbed Sea Monster. I know they dubbed Son of Godzilla. And I know they dubbed Destroy All Monsters. Now, that is not the AIP dubs. Those are done by Titan-Tetra. They were the same company, just relabeled. Frontier is something completely different. It's the international dubs that I'm talking about. And for those of you who are familiar with the Frontier dubs, as I am, because honestly, those versions of the movies were what I grew up on more than the AIP dubs, the exception being the Sea Monster. if you watch that science fiction masterpiece, The Green Slime, from 1967, you actually get to see a lot of those voice actors in real life. In fact, I was actually, speaking of today being December 7th, I was watching Tora 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 the other day. One of my favorite films of all time. And there is a scene with some American ambassadors in Japan speaking to one another. Those actors are the dubbing voices for the Frontier dubs. They also appear in The Green Slime, and they appear in tons of other Japanese science fiction films from this era. So I just really found that funny. In fact, that actually kind of brings up the first note I actually have. There seems to be a lot of confusion within the comments as to what was the original dub. The original dub was actually those international dubs. Those were the original dubs made by Toho, or produced by Toho, I should say, and released for general distribution to other companies, you know, across the planet. And those companies could do with them as they saw fit. For example, in the 1970s, those Hong Kong dubs were the dubs that ultimately were released on television and in theaters. The distributors there didn't feel like they needed to put any more money into it, and so that's what played on television, was those original dubs. But in the early days, that just wasn't the case. A lot of those distributors, because there's a lot more, there's a bigger market for these movies, especially in the 60s, took one look at those dubs and said, no thank you. They just hated those. And so they threw those dubs away, used them as like a basic script, right, to basically get the gist of what this movie is. And then commissioned their own dubbing studio to make their own dub. So the AIP dubs, the Titan and Teacher dubs, for movies like Sea Monster, Son of Godzilla, Mothra vs. Godzilla, Godzilla versus the Smog Monster, etc., etc. Those are actually the American dubs. Those were commissioned by an American distributor themselves, so they're not the original. So I want to clarify that immediately. That was the case there. Let's see, I had a good one here. Michael Hansen 3970 said, quote, the version of War of the Gargantuas I saw as a kid in the late 60s as a U.S. Army brat on the big screen at the Family Theater in Perlicher Frost, Munich, Germany. Oh, he was stationed in Germany. Okay. Was dubbed in English and had one specific shot that freaked me out and gave me nightmares that I've seen that I've never seen in any other version of the film, including the dubbed version that now appears all over streaming services. I'm referring to the moment after the Green Gargantua grabs the Asian maid from a building at the airport, pops her into its mouth, and chews on her. A second later, he takes a big spit, and what hits the pavement on the version I saw was a large wad of wet, chewed-up gray rags. You are correct. This is not a case of Mandela, as you say within your comment. This was the UPA version that you watched. It certainly wasn't the 1960s. I think you're conflating your decade. It was because the UPA cut was not released until 1970. So you might have been thinking the late 60s. You said so yourself in the comment, but it was actually the very early 70s. But the UPA cut, there is a shot of Gyra spitting out the wad of clothing. And that is removed from the Japanese version. The Japanese version, I believe it cuts to some a bouquet of flowers, I believe she was holding on the ground, to make it a little less visceral. And I actually found a note in here that kind of goes into a little bit. And this is, again, The Amazing Ishiro Honda book. And I have the page here. Let's see. I'm on page, if you have it, so I'm page 232 to 233. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. I'm going to read it verbatim. Accommodations to the American side increased. An undated English language script bearing the imprint of both Toho and Benedict Productions, which was Saperstein's banner for overseas distribution, indicates that Honda and his crew shot at least 9 scenes in 2 different ways. One for the domestic release, and again for a separate American edit. Some of these favor cuts, as the Japanese crew called them, introduced Tamblyn earlier to more clearly frame him as the star in the US edit. But the script also shows that Saperstein wanted various scenes, such as those involving press conferences, to be shorter in his version. We would edit the films and make such additions or deletions as we felt would make for better progression, Saperstein later said. So yeah. That confirmed it right there. That confirmed all that I was talking about within the video itself. There was, you know, a multitude of different edits and stuff like that that the Saperstein cut has to that of, which is the version that you watched, Michael, to that of the original Japanese version. And it's the original Japanese version in terms of the editing is what we have playing and streaming all over YouTube right now, or at least as of this video here. But it's dubbed. It's that dubbed version. So I hope that kind of clarifies that. You're not going crazy. That's not the Mandela effect. You watched the UPA cut. I'm actually kind of curious in the audience which version of the movie that you prefer, because there seems to be a lot of debate here in the comment sections over which version is actually better. To kind of ape off of that, the number one question that I actually got within this video itself was, where do you find the US version? Where can I watch it? If you want to attain it legally, note what I said there. If you want to attain it legally, the best thing that you can do is buy a copy of the Classic Media double feature DVD set with Rodan, because that contains actually a pretty decent quality version of the UPA cut. In fact, it was that print used within that DVD that I used for any video source within my video when talking specifically about stuff within the UPA cut. It's a pretty decent quality print. It is vastly superior to that within the Japanese. The Japanese version on that DVD is terrible. The print is terrible. It's got this weird blue hue. In fact, I'll actually pull it up right here. I'm gonna pull it up, and you can kind of see what I'm talking about. War of the Gargantuas. U.S. versus Japanese versions, right there. Here, let me... Oh yeah, here's a good one. Oh, looks like I didn't have that one ready to go. Now we will. Here we are. There we go. Yeah, so here's the difference, right? And this guy says on the DVD from both versions were taken for this comparison, the Japanese version is remarkably darker than the one from the US. This is the Japanese version. This is the US version. Look how night and day different the two prints are. And this is just within that Classic Media DVD. And this is something I noted even when I was a kid. The other thing that I noted is that the Japanese version is slightly more open matted than the US cut, and that seems to be a problem that reigns to this day. You know, if you look at the Criterion versions, when it comes to these movies, is that they're a little too open matte, so you get a lot of slice marks at the bottom of the screen. It's really prevalent in the classic media DVDs, and it's even more prevalent in the Criterion releases, which again are basically what Toho just handed them and said, take it or leave it. But yeah, you can kind of see it here. But this I wish I found this site here before doing the video, because it really actually helped me quite a bit in terms of structure. Just kind of comparing the US versions versus the Japanese edits. It is actually really cool. This is from moviecensorship.com. It's actually a really great article. I really appreciate it. But again, look at the night and day quality difference here. You know, just comparing the two scenes side by side. You know, one just seems a little more dirtier and grimier than the other. So, again, I think the UPA cut is actually in pretty decent... Oh, yeah, you can really see it here. Just decent quality as compared to the Japanese version. Something else that I also wanted to mention that I did not mention, I failed to mention this within my original video, is that there's some additional special effects sequences. And you can actually see it here. In the Japanese version of War of the Gargantuas, you actually get a full body shot of Gaira here. And in the Japanese version, the live-action elements, right? Live-action stuff is the same. It's just the special effects shot is a little different. And I'm not sure if this is one of the 9 changes that Steve Ryfle and Ed Gajewski mentioned in the book, but this is certainly one that I found pretty goddamn fascinating. It's very different. You get a full kind of half-body shot of Gaira, a big reveal, in the Japanese version, where you just kind of see his head peeking out in the U.S. version. And in the U.S. version, I think the reason why they were kind of, you know, going about doing it that way was, I think it kind of played up the mystery as to what monster was who more than in the Japanese version, because in the Japanese version, which goes into another very big question, a popular question I would get in this video, was the Japanese version is a sequel, quote unquote, to Frankenstein Conquers the World, which was a film that they made the year before. And so the monsters are actually called Frankenstein's monsters. And it is in the Japanese version that the monsters are actually named. The brown Gargantua being Sonda, the green one being Gaira. The monsters don't have any names whatsoever in the American version. They're just called the green Gargantua and the brown Gargantua, which is why they're actually not called Gargantuas at all in the Japanese version. Gargantuas is a word created very specifically by Saperstein for the U.S. version of the movie, because he wanted to remove all reference to Frankenstein, references to Frankenstein and Frankenstein Conquers the World from the U.S. version of the film. Now, why that is, we don't really know. I have a feeling I do, but you have to take what I say, and I believe I kind of hint at this within the video. You have to take what I say here with a grain of salt, because I never met Saperstein. Saperstein was long dead. He was dead long before I came into the picture. But I have a feeling that the reason why he made the decision to remove all reference to Frankenstein was because, well, he couldn't find a proper distributor for Frankenstein Conquers the World originally. So he had to give it to, essentially, his big rival. That was American International Pictures, headed by Samuel Arkoff, and I believe James H. Nicholson was the guy's name. And, well, they always rubbed him the wrong way, because the same thing happened to Mothra vs. Godzilla. You see, Mothra vs. Godzilla was Saperstein kind of touching his toes in the water, kind of testing the waters, so to say, because he didn't really have much of a say when it came to the production of the movie because it was already underway. But come the following year, 1965, with the success of Mothra vs. Godzilla, he was able to make Monster Zero and Frankenstein Conquered the World. Now, it is interesting to note that AIP seems to have passed up Monster Zero in favor of Frankenstein Conquers the World, which is kind of surprising. I do think Monster Zero was definitely something right up AIP's alley, but I can't find any reasoning anywhere why Saperstein. Maybe Saperstein was just a little more protective of Invasion of Astro Monsters than he was Frankenstein Conquers the World. And the same goes for War of the Gargantuas the year later. I don't know. But whatever happened, they weren't released in the United States until 1970. Through, I believe, Marin Pictures, which, for those of you who don't know, Marin Pictures is the reason why Godzilla vs. Megalon was released to such success over here in the United States in 1976. And if you want to hear a really interesting interview, listen to the audio commentary for Godzilla vs. Megalon by Steve Ryfle and Stuart Galbraith. It is a fantastic commentary. It really is one of the best. It's one of the greatest. And toward the end of the commentary, about the last third of the documentary, they actually brought the head of Marin Productions in for an interview. And he talked about how he would get these movies and how he would try to distribute them and how he would distribute them. He was a distributor. And crazy marketing campaigns and stuff like that he would go through. It is a fantastic listen, and I highly recommend that you guys check that out. But he was the one that actually was able to distribute War of the Gargantuas Invasion of Astro Monster, aka Monster Zero, over here in the States. Now, the fascinating thing is that when we really get down to brass tacks, what made both of these movies, but especially War of the Gargantuas, popular over here in the United States was not the fact that they were released in theaters. They were released to mediocre success, middling, I should say, not mediocre, middling success in drive-ins and stuff like that come 1970. But come 1970, that market had dried up considerably. Considerably. I would even argue come 1966, that drive-in market, that double bill market that was so popular within the 50s and early 60s had really dried up. And a lot of these exploitation companies were really feeling that pinch at this time. Even Toho was. I mean, you look at the quality and size and scale of the pictures that they were making in the late 50s, early 60s versus even now. In 1966, which was when they made War of the Gargantuas, different beasts. A little bit still sizable productions, don't get me wrong, for Japan, but still smaller in scale than something like Mothra, which truly is an epic kaiju film. Mothra is a big movie, guys. It is a really big movie. I really don't know, but it was television was where War of the Gargantuas really got its mainstay. And it is television that kind of made these movies as big as they are, because it was Del Toro, Tarantino, and especially Brad Pitt. They recall seeing it in television, not being played in a movie theater. And that's how I saw it, too. I saw it on AMC. That was actually the first time I ever saw War of the Gargantuas. It was the UPA cut, and it was on AMC. And I had it taped on a VHS. Commercials and all. And I wore that tape out because... just a little bit of a random tangent, anecdote here. They played Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, and it was the AIP cut, not the one that was available on the Sony DVD. And War of the Gargantuas, and it was back-to-back, and I taped the whole thing. And I... Rarely did I watch the Sea Monster, because when I was younger, I did not like the Sea Monster. As an adult, I actually appreciate it a lot more now than I did back then. Which is kind of ironic. But I wore out the tape because I was watching War of the Gargantuas so much. I just loved this movie, and I still do. But it was this UPA cut that I grew up watching. And it was this UPA cut that Tarantino, Del Toro, everybody was watching, because it was the UPA cut that would be dubbed into Spanish, into French, into all these different languages and stuff like that. It was in a very similar vein to the Americanized version of Godzilla King of the Monsters with Raymond Burr. It wasn't the original Japanese version that got dubbed into all those languages. It was the version with Raymond Burr because Raymond Burr was in it. That is what made Godzilla famous. This is what made War of the Gargantua such a success and have such a cult stamp on society. Because I mean this quite literally. I think War of the Gargantuas is, other than Godzilla, kind of like the only big kaiju film that kind of has hit the public lexicon. And now I say this, and there's a giant asterisk there, because everybody knows Rodan, Mothra, King Ghidorah, and all that stuff. But those are associated with Godzilla. War of the Gargantuas is not associated with Godzilla. War of the Gargantuas is its own thing. You know, kind of like Gamera, it was its own thing. Hell, even Gargantuas is now a term in reference to a giant beast, thanks to this film. So, just want to kind of point that out there. But a question that I kind of had was, which version do you enjoy? Do you prefer the fact that Saperstein removed all reference to Frankenstein in it, or do you prefer it being a sequel to Frankenstein Conquers the World? Because there's a lot of arguments to be made for both sides. I tend to lean more towards the Japanese version, because I think that's the original intent of the movie. But removing all those references certainly does fix some glaring continuity mistakes between the two movies, which I know some snobs of today would definitely think was a bad thing. Would definitely complain about, and do complain about. Personally, I don't really care. I mean, one of them being, it's kind of implied within the Japanese version that Sanda is the same creature from the previous film. But clearly not. They look completely different. They blatantly call the creature Frankenstein in the Japanese version of Frankenstein Conquers the World. Not Sanda that we see in this version. But if I'm going to be honest, even when I was watching the Japanese version when I was, in high school, which is when the Classic Media DVD came out for me, I always thought Sanda was spawned from a piece of Frankenstein. Because remember that scene where in Frankenstein Conquers the World where Frankenstein's hand gets severed and then starts crawling around? I always assumed that's what happened with Sanda. Right? A piece of his flesh came off in the fight with Baragon, and that grew into a piece of Frankenstein's flesh came off during his fight with Baragon, and that became Sanda, and that was the creature that we see within War of the Gargantuas. How a piece of Frankenstein managed to get to the ocean to make Gyra, I don't know. Maybe they assumed that the octopus ending was going to be the ending they went with, which is a whole other can of worms that I don't necessarily really want to go into this. But I don't really know. And again, it's kind of the loose continuity between 1 and 2. That being said, what was continuity with movies back then? Say it is confirmed that Sanda is supposed to be the Frankenstein from the previous movie. Should we really care? Because you have to remember that back in the 60s, continuity is not what it was today. Absolutely not what it was today. Because also remember back then, chances were, I mean, TV was just becoming popular, right? Right? if you didn't get to see this movie in theaters, you simply didn't get to see it. And even if you watched it on TV, that's why television shows were done like this, were not serialized, right? They were very episodic. And that's because if you missed one episode of your favorite TV show, that was it. You didn't have any way to reconsume it later back then, or to check out what you missed. So every episode kind of had a reset button at the end of it. I mean, look at TOS, Star Trek TOS. You know, Batman. same thing. Almost every show back then, hardly anything was serialized. And the same thing can be said with movies, whether they were sequels or not. You had to assume that the people that were coming in had no idea about the previous film. So, let's say the design changes. They just completely changed the design. We just kind of have to accept that. Because the process in which movies were written and movies were made back in the 60s, very different beasts than today, where continuity is quite literally everything. To the point that it's almost a pain in the ass. And I really have to thank Marvel for that, because without Marvel, you know, it'd probably be a little bit more loosey-goosey today. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How this movie fits, somehow this movie apparently also fits within the Shōwa-era Godzilla timeline. How? No idea. None of the Shōwa-era Godzilla movies make sense continuity-wise, but yet, supposedly, according to Toho, they do. So, just take it with a grain of salt. Take continuity with anything from the 70s, from the 60s, really, with a grain of salt. Continuity was never their strong suit. Continuity was never necessarily their concern. They were just mainly concerned with telling a story that relatively continued said story from the previous film. Hell, even like, let's look at the biggest franchise that really kind of tried to do some continuity. And that was Planet of the Apes, 1968 through 1973. They broke their own continuity dozens of times. You know? And again, this is stuff that I discussed with my friend Oliver on our show Go Ape on that podcast. So take it with a grain of salt. Personally, all it does is it really makes me want to say, I really wish Nick Adams was back in War of the Gargantuas, instead of Russ Tamblyn, which brings me to the next thing that I got a lot of comments on. That the stories about Russ Tamblyn were greatly exaggerated. Well, I can't really agree with that, because not only did Saperstein complain about him, but so did most of the crew from the Japanese side complain about him. And as more proof, I point out this book. This book shows a lot about it, you know. In fact, I'm gonna read you some of the complaints that they had about him. Let's see. I'm looking at page 230 and 231. If you have your copy of the hardcover edition. Let's see. And I even used this quote within the video. Honda-san had to hold back and bear so much during that one. Russ Tamblyn was such an asshole, Seijutani said. He was exactly like that character he played in West Side Story. Like a hoodlum turned actor. Raw, very selfish, rebellious, and disobedient. The director told him to come and walk from this side to the other, not giving any specific acting instructions, just explaining the scene. And Tamblyn said that he usually does the exact opposite of what the director says. What a punk. He pissed me off. Let's see. This is the third and final Toho UPA production. Yes. Nick Adams was gone. Saperstein replaced the star. Tamblyn. Let's see. Seijutani then comments, even Honda looked pissed. Tani continued. On top of that, Tamblyn's acting sucked. Afterwards, we complained, why the hell did they bring over a guy like that? Saperstein, the man responsible, concurred. Nick Adams was a consummate pro. and blended in very easily, he said. Tamblyn was a royal pain in the ass. And again, that was the other quote that I used for this as well. Let's see. There was one interpreter that spoke English, and he interpreted between myself, this is Tamblyn talking, and Honda, and myself and Honda, and myself and the actors. Tamblyn later recalled, quote, "Lucky for me, they didn't know what I was saying half of the time, so I changed all of my lines. My lines were so bad in the original script, I had changed them all." Which, again, is a big no-no for Honda. Anybody who knows how Honda directed, he hated such improvisations. He hated changing the scripts whatsoever. It's one reason why I feel he was wrong to direct movies like Latitude Zero, or even hell, even I would argue The H-Man. I think somebody like Jun Fukuda could have handled that a lot better than Honda. Just because of the nature of what kind of films those are. Not so much in terms of Honda being a bad director. Honda's my favorite director, so I'm not going to really complain about that. Let's see. There was another thing here that I wanted to mention that Tamblyn said that kind of summarizes the difference between him and Nick Adams in general. Let's see if I can find it. Let's see. Hamilton. I gotta find it. Yeah, here it is. But it was Tamblyn who tested Honda's patient most. At one point, the production went on location on Mount Kuradake, or whatever, in the Niigata prefecture, in a treacherous mountain range where climbers often perished, to shoot Tamblyn and his team hiking and searching for Sonda and discovering the giant footprints in the snow. During a break, Tamblyn wandered off by himself, scaling alongside a cliff in an area prone to rock slides. Honda's crew pleaded with Tamblyn to descend, but he refused. Even when it was time to resume work, quote, "I'm sure Honda was furious, but he didn't have time to get angry," Tani said. "It was a great learning experience for me. Watching from the sidelines, it showed me how a director should be." And kind of the temperament of Honda, because Honda, I don't think, would ever have really said anything bad about Tamblyn, but Tani, not the case. Seiji Tani, not the case. Seiji Tani strikes me as kind of a bro. If Honda was the more collected, sort of reserved man, Seiji Tani was the guy who spoke it as it was, you know. Tamblyn didn't socialize when work was done. He'd go back to his suite at his Imperial Hotel, and tensions eventually developed on set between the actors. Tamblyn later say he had, quote, "learned to love the film, though he was embarrassed by it at the time." Now, this is the quote that I found very interesting about Russ Tamblyn, which I think greatly contrasts him with Nick Adams. "I never thought anybody was going to see it," referring to War of the Gargantuas. "I was offered money. My wife at the time said, quote, 'I've always wanted to go to Japan.' So I said, 'All right, let's go.' Unfortunately for me, when the movie was released, they ran it on a Los Angeles TV station every single night. I thought, that's it. I'll never work again." Tamblyn did later give Honda a compliment of sorts. He said, "I liked working with him because he didn't give me too much direction. The best directors I worked with gave me very little direction." Well, that's because you're being kind of a douchebag, Tamblyn. That's why he wasn't giving you much direction, because you never listened to it anyways, Mr. Tamblyn. But isn't that kind of fascinating? How Tamblyn's reaction to War of the Gargantuas was very much so, "I'm never going to work in Hollywood ever again." Well, that's such a contrast to somebody like Nick Adams. Nick Adams, granted, was an actor who kind of fell on hard times, and that's one reason why he started working on these sort of lower budget international science fiction affairs. Frankenstein Conquers the World, Monster Zero, and then in England, again, kind of for American International Pictures, he did a wonderful science fiction movie, one that I really enjoy, called Die Monster Die, which is a loose adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's The Color Out of Space. And it is a wonderful movie where he stars opposite Boris Karloff. And if none of you guys have ever seen that movie, I highly recommend it. Nick Adams gives a great performance in that movie. But then, well, that's because Nick Adams is a great actor. He really is. He knows when to play it up. He knows when to play it down. He's a good actor. Recently, I've been watching a lot of the Rebel because it's been playing on TV. And I think it was replacing Maverick on TV. For those of you who don't know, my primary job, I work at a television station. And so part of my job is monitor this TV station, make sure it's going okay. And so I was rather surprised to see the Rebel replace the show Maverick. And I was like, oh, there's Nick Adams. Nick Adams is wonderful and a delight to watch in that show. Just as much as he is a delight to watch in Frankenstein Conquers the World and Monster Zero and especially Die Monster Die. I think Die Monster Die is actually my favorite performance he gives. It's genuinely a great performance. Go watch that movie, guys. I think it's on YouTube for free. Don't quote me on that. But Nick Adams, by contrast, was delighted to be working on these movies, and I think a lot of that came down to the fact that he was happy he had a job. And on top of that, it wasn't just a job, it was a job as a leading man in something that would likely get, some audiences involved. It was very similar to another American actor who came over here called Richard Jekyll. Richard Jekyll was at the Green Slime in Latitude Zero, and the crews had a great time with him. The Japanese crews had a great time with him, and he loved working on these movies. He was full of enthusiasm for the projects because he was getting to his face out there. He knew that these were popular genre movies and that they were low-budget B films, quote-unquote. But who the fuck cares? My name is going to be on the poster. It's going to be me acting predominantly in the movie. Therefore, treat it as such. Treat it as best as you possibly can. And this is what's so fascinating. The contrast between Nick Adams and Russ Tamblyn. Everyone loved working with Nick Adams, who was apparently called himself Horny Nick, according to I believe it was Kuni Mizuno who he was trying to sleep with when making the movies. But he was known very much so for socializing with his Japanese cast. In fact, he struck up a really good friendship with Yoshio Tsuchiya, who played the alien controller in Monster Zero. And it's so much so that apparently, and I take this from the audio commentary by Stuart Galbraith for Monster Zero, apparently Nick Adams genuinely asked, because he genuinely liked Yoshio Tsuchiya's acting so much. And again, Yoshio Tsuchiya had played in tons of Akira Kurosawa movies by this point. He said, could I have an autograph? Could I have an autograph? And Yoshio Tsuchiya thought it was just, Nick Adams being a nice guy and kind of humbling him. But later on, Tomoyuki Tanaka went over to the United States and he had a brief meeting with Nick Adams. And sure enough, that picture signed by Yoshio Tsuchiya was hanging up in Nick Adams' study. Kind of shows you what kind of man he is compared to that of Russ Tamblyn. So the contrast is just all over the place. And on top of that, he gives a very spirited performance in both Frankenstein Conquers the World and Invasion of Astro Monsters compared to frickin' Russ Tamblyn, who looks like he's on an acid trip throughout the entire movie. I don't think he could look like he cared less. Right? Oh, it's just so... It's so aggravating. But I did notice something in the comments that I would like to note. And it's something that I didn't really think about until I read some of these comments. And that was, as a kid, I never really... A lot of people noted that as a kid, they never really noticed that Russ Tamblyn's performance was so terrible. They were just so wrapped up in the craziness of the movie that they didn't really care. And as when I was a kid, I didn't care either. When I was first consuming more of the Gargantuas on TV, I didn't give a shit that his performance was are objectively terrible. I didn't care. I just was enjoying the movie enough as it was. And I think that is a testament to the movie itself and what happens within the movie, that you don't care. You don't care that his performance is unbelievably medicated and lackluster and absolutely terrible, and he's making some horrible one-liner jokes. The movie is good enough that it doesn't matter. Because the true drama of the movie is not the live-action stuff. It is the monsters. Which brings me to a next bit of point here. This, in my humble opinion, was the true moment, for good and for bad, within kaiju cinema history, where the official shift occurred, where the monsters became the characters, not the human stuff. The monsters themselves started becoming the characters, and this is a trope that we would see especially in the 1970s, where the monsters themselves have the depth, monsters themselves have the performances to back them up. It was one of the things that really made Eiji Tsuburaya's kaiju shine above all the other ones that were being made by other studios come 1966. Remember, next year, 1967, all 5 of Japan's major studios released a kaiju film of their own, right? So the kaiju boom was about to reach its apex, right? But what really what made Eiji Tsuburaya's kaijus stand out from all the others is the fact that he would always hire actors of some kind to play his monsters. You know, usually there were stunt actors, don't get me wrong, Hiro Nakajima being a predominant one. I mean, look at some of his stunt work that he did in Seven Samurai, some really great shit. But they were actors, right? And that's one of the things that really actually makes War of the Gargantuas shines, was that decision by Eiji Tsuburaya to allow the actors to allow us to actually see their eyes, which I think was a big mistake that was made within the King Kong movies that Toho made. So King Kong vs. Godzilla and King Kong Escapes. For some reason, we don't see the actor's eyes. And this is something that even Rick Baker got when he made his gorilla suit for the 1976 remake of King Kong. And that is, we need eyes. We need to be able to connect with them. Because unlike lizards, you know, Godzilla, lizards aren't very expressive, right? So you can kind of buy the kind of wooden-faced blank stares of Godzilla or you know, things of that nature. But with an ape creature, apes and mammals themselves are unbelievably expressive. I mean, look at your dog, for God's sakes. Look at your dog and how many expressions your dog makes, you know? And that's difficult to do with a suit. It's very difficult to do with a suit. In fact, one way that Rick Baker in King Kong 76 worked around that was he made multiple faces of King Kong and would just kind of switch the head out depending on what mood Kong was supposedly going to feel, because there just wasn't flexible enough rubber to officially, you know, make it seem normal, you know, to have the emotions kind of change. It's easier just to make other masks. Now, I'm not saying the War of the Gargantua suits are perfect. They aren't. Particularly Gaira, I think, has an unbelievably stiff face. And I think the makeup on the face, they're clearly masks. That's what they kind of went with. And other than the actors being able to kind of open and close their mouths, it's pretty stationary. And I think it would have benefited had it, instead of it being a mask, it was full-on makeup. And so it's pretty stiff. But what makes up for that is the fact that we see Hiro Nakajima, the actor who played Gaira, we see his eyes, right? We see that anger. We see that shock in Sanda. We see that shock and horror of him discovering that Gaira has just eaten people, right? We see that rage in Sanda's face when he sees Gaira has just eaten people. And that's what's so fascinating about it. And that's one of the things that's so... Oh, whoops. Didn't mean to hit that. One of the things that makes the film... the tragic nature of the film, right, is the fact that one is good and one is evil. Sanda's good, Gaira is evil. and the thing that kicks off the war of the Gargantuas, if you will, is the fact that if you really look at it, Sonda instigates it, because in a moment of pure rage, Sonda grabs a tree and starts beating up Gyra, right? And so Gyra retaliates. Gyra is the stronger of the two, gets the upper hand, and runs away. But what does Sonda do in the immediate aftermath of that? It's like he knows what he just fucked up. It's like, and you can see it in the actor's eyes, and that's the power of that decision. Just the power of being able to see the eyes. You can see that Sonda is totally regretful, like, oh my god, what have I done? What have I done? And that comes through in the final battle, because throughout the entire final battle, you see Sonda constantly being like, don't do this. Please, just come with me. We'll disappear in the woods. Humanity will leave us alone if we just kind of disappear out there. Come with me. And Gyra's like, I ain't have none of this shit. You just beat me up. I ain't have none of this. And ultimately, Sonda has to make the decision that Gyra is evil, and therefore I have to kill my own brother to save people, to save humanity, because Sonda has had a decent time with human beings, unlike Gyra, who's only ever been, shot by them. And so I that goes into one of the biggest differences between the UPA version and the Japanese version, to sort of bring this all back to what the original discussion was about. Terror Hunt, which was used in the American version during a lot of the fight sequences and stuff, really plays up the spectacle of the monsters, right? And I really kind of brought... Sorry, I just got distracted. That music, Terror Hunt, really plays up the spectacle of the fight, right? Makes it really exciting, really visceral, and also kind of cheesy, right? Because it's kind of over the top. But then you listen to the Japanese version, you listen to Akira Ifukube's original score, and it's an unbelievably tragic piece of music. And I think that is where Honda's influence really shines. Because if you really look at this movie, it's not Honda's film, right? Honda has some stamps all over it, particularly when it comes to the script itself and the tragedy of the monsters themselves, for example. But it's really Eiji Tsuburaya's film. Because he was the one that was directing the actors on the miniature sets and blah, 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 blah. But that is where Honda's decision-making as a director really comes through, because Ifukube's score, if you listen to it during the fight sequences, is not a spectacle. It is tragic. And ultimately, I think that's the reason I prefer the Japanese version to the American re-edit. Despite there being several edits in the American version I prefer to the Japanese version, but it's this one that makes me really say, yeah, I like the Japanese version more. And no, it doesn't have anything to do with the dub. It doesn't have anything to do with the original language, and stuff like that. No, in terms of the movie itself, it's why I prefer the Japanese version to the UPA cut. Now, hungry for tasty food and comic art. I wish you were here earlier because I addressed this. Being in my 50s, I saw the chewed-up dress version in the 1970s. Yeah, I discussed that. We discussed that there were two shooting scripts for the movie. That there was the American version, and then there was the Japanese version, and that was one of the edits that was made. Was that? So I kind of wish you were here for that, unfortunately. Next question I have is, where can I find the UPA version now, since the Classic Media DVD is out of print? I recommend a certain Internet Archive. Actually, I need to know. I'm going to look this up right now. Is the Internet Archive up still? It was down for a little while earlier. And I know that because I use the Internet Archive to do a lot of my research for my documentaries. And yes, it is back up. Wonderful. It was down for maintenance, I think, this morning. And I was all in a panic because I was trying to work on my my next documentary. And a lot of my sources I pull from the Internet Archive. And I couldn't. I would like to apologize to everybody for that sound that I just made. So here's an interesting comment that I found. A very interesting comment that I found that I think shines a lot of light into why the American versions are so hard to find now. And it's because of Toho. Hardcore Zen, 4 weeks ago, wrote, I worked at Tsuburaya Productions for 15 years and had some interactions with Toho. Both Tsuburaya and Toho have an almost paranoid attitude when it comes to ownership of their properties. My take is that one of the major reasons the American dubs are unavailable is that Toho fears they could be sued by the companies that made those dubs, which of course is ridiculous, since those companies no longer exist and could hardly claim ownership of the dubs even if they did. This is also the reason you'll notice that photos of King Kong from King Kong vs. Godzilla and King Kong Escapes rarely appeared in licensed books on Godzilla. And I never noticed that until this man mentioned this in the comment. Suddenly I'm like, oh my god, you are completely correct. The recent book, Godzilla, The First 70 Years, only shows King Kong in posters from the film, but includes no stills showing Kong. Why? Who knows? It's completely irrational. When I worked on the book Eiji Tsuburaya, Master of Monsters, I did include several stills of Kong from those films. After the book was published, I was chewed out by one of Toho's guys in LA for doing that. They believed only Universal Pictures could authorize such use and learned they'd be sued and feared they'd be sued for it. They were not. Shocker, they were not. One of the reasons for this fear is that the contracts made back in the 60s rarely, perhaps never, addressed possible later releases of the films in different media. That actually makes a lot of sense because it didn't exist back then, right? Nobody back then anticipated these films would still be selling decades later on media they could not have imagined at the time, like Blu-ray, DVD, streaming, etc., etc., etc. So I thanked him for this comment and thought it was a rather interesting. That shined a lot of light into a lot of the sort of the behind the scenes paranoia that kind of went on at this time. Thank you very much, Hungry Tasty Food and Comic Art. Thank you very much for your comment. So yeah, this isn't so much a discussion of the movie itself, as much as, even though I have given my opinions clearly about how much I adore War of the Gargantuas, but more of the history behind it and answering some of the questions that I got on that video that I made. So yeah. But that would explain a lot. And so I actually, there were several questions that I sort of got around here, and I'm kind of looping them all into this one of where can we watch some of these US edits? Where can we watch them now? Well, in terms of Godzilla, your best bet is still to get the Classic Media DVDs, right? That is how you can officially own them. But if you know some people and kind of know where to look, cough, cough, Internet Archive, you can discover that there are a lot of dedicated fans out there. Some of them, I would even say, are total snobs and need to chill the fuck out. But there are fans out there that have done some truly, truly magnificent fan restorations of these altered versions, including a 1080p restoration of the UPA cut of War of the Gargantuas, which I only discovered after I made the video. And it's done very well. I believe they actually used AI to kind of up-res some of the altered scenes. And it looked really good. I was really impressed by it. It was certainly better than the fan restoration I saw for the American version of Rodan, which, like War of the Gargantuas, has some special effects sequences in it that are not in the Japanese version, which is where the true restorations happened. In that version, you can kind of tell what scenes were actually in the Japanese version, because they looked crisp and clean. Not so in War of the Gargantuas. War of the Gargantuas, I couldn't really tell the difference between the American versions and the Japanese versions. So whoever did that fan restoration, fucking great job, dude. You did wonderful. Or man, you did a great job. So props to you. And thanks for doing some of God's work, you know. I do think that those versions of the movies deserve to be preserved. I think they are just as much a part of Godzilla and kaiju history as the Japanese versions are. So I believe that they should be preserved and restored and everything like that. And I got several comments on this video basically saying that people prefer to watch War of the Gargantuas in the original language with English subtitles, which is perfectly fine. That's how I like watching the movies. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, oh, you're wrong for doing that. No. What I am saying is that simply doing that, by simply having these movies in Japanese with English subtitles, really alienates the audience predominantly responsible for making these movies what they were. Children. Specifically children in later elementary school through middle school, early high school. Those were the audiences for these movies. I need a drink. In fact, I want to bring up something here. In, again, Steve Ryfle and Ed Gaczuseski's books. Let's see if I can. This is in chapter 4, which is Goodbye, Godzilla. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. The copious fan mail that Honda was now receiving seemed to validate Toho's business strategy, which was starting to steer these movies more towards a child audience. In February 1965, he reprinted several letters, all from children, in studio newsletters. Quote, I really enjoyed Ghidorah, especially when Godzilla laughs, holding his stomach, wrote a child from Shizuoka. I love the monster films by Toho much more than those teen films by Nikatsu or Daiei, wrote another. Another kid said, quote, we students have long vacations during the summer and winter, and almost always there is a monster film showing by Toho. Honda would praise these youngsters for their, quote, pure-hearted imagination, but he was clearly conflicted. So I'm not going to get into the whole confliction with Ishiro Honda over, you know, steering those more towards kids and stuff like that. But that sort of says it all. Children, kids, make up a huge chunk of the audience. You see, it seems like we've all grown up watching these movies, and now we think we have the monopoly over these films, and we don't. We are ignoring what God... It's like we've forgotten that we were children once, you know? And that's one of the reasons why I love David Callett, film historian David Callett, so much, is because he embraces that insanity. Right, he's the one that goes no. These movies are ridiculous. They're silly and ridiculous, and we should embrace them for that. And we can't ignore them. We shouldn't ignore them. It's actually one of the reasons why I'm so happy we're living in the time that we do. Because us, the fans, really can finally have their cake and eat it too. Look, if you like the more serious kaiju flicks, as I do, I love the more serious stuff. You're talking to a guy, the original Godzilla is his third favorite film of all time, right? Well, guess what? The new Godzilla stuff coming out from Japan has been just that. It's been dark, it's been brooding, it's been super serious, it's been great. Shin Godzilla, fantastic. Godzilla -1 blew everybody's expectations out of the goddamn water, including my own, right? Great stuff. True cinema, in my opinion. It's really giving Godzilla a new face and bringing him to life in a new way. But let's say you just want to have a dumb, fun time, right? You just want to feel like a kid again, or you want to introduce your kids to Godzilla. Well, guess what? You got the Monsterverse. Godzilla X Kong was a blast. Was it dumb and ridiculous? Oh, absolutely. It was one of the dumbest movies I've ever seen. But Giant Monkey has a toothache. You know? So, guys, these movies weren't really made with us in mind. They were made for kids. They were made for younger audiences who had a pure imagination, right? Very similar to the Ray Harryhausen movies. They were made for the childlike wonder in us all. They're made for general audiences. They weren't just made to be dark and brooding films and stuff like that. No, these were films that were made to entertain everyone. And War of the Gargantuas premiered in, I don't believe it was the Champion Film Festival yet. I don't believe those came out until the 70s. But it premiered in a festival predominantly made for people in middle school. There you go. That says it all. And that was Toho, not us. That was Toho. So this whole thing of, you have to watch it in its original Japanese language with English subtitles. You're just an entitled prick. Oh, there. I wonder how... Tell me how you really feel, Adam. Tell me how you really feel about all of that. Let's see. It is rather interesting, though, because War of the Gargantuas was written by Takashi Kimura under the nickname, or under the pseudonym Kaoru Mabuchi, which he specifically chose a name that could be of either gender. Is what because he hated writing these movies, and he didn't really consider it worthy of him come the mid 1960s. I believe the first film in which he went by Kaoru Mabuchi was Frankenstein Conquered. Made in 1965. Now, the fascinating thing about all that, and why I'm bringing that up, right, is because this is a good segue for it, because Honda was clearly conflicted at this time, because he wanted to make more serious movies and thought that these monster movies should be more serious, in vein of the original Godzilla, which, of course, is his masterpiece. But look at what was happening at Toho at this time, right? 1965 and 1966 were very interesting years for Toho. Or 1966 and 1967, I should say, were very interesting years for Toho, because you basically had two kaiju films being made at the same time. You had two of these movies being made at the same time. You had your A team and you had your B team. The A team tended to have a little bit more money to spend with, and usually had a U.S. distributor ready to go. In the case of War of the Gargantuas, it was UPA who was putting money into the film. That was 1966. And in the case of 1967, you had King Kong Escapes, which had Rankin Bass backing it, right? Who also inserted an American actor into it. Yeah, so they had Western backing. They had a Western actor in it. They were the priority film, right? They were the ones that had slightly more money to work with. They had sort of the A team working on it. And this team was Eiji Tsuburaya for special effects, Ishiro Honda to be the director, for good and for bad, by the way. Ishiro Honda, which I think he fits very well with War of the Gargantuas for the tone that movie has. But for something like King Kong Escapes, I think he was completely mismatched as a director. To me, King Kong Escapes, it feels like a movie Jun Fukuda should have directed. Keep the script the same, but Jun Fukuda should have directed. I think it would have been a vastly superior movie, but that's neither here nor there. Nevertheless, Ishiro Honda was selected to direct that movie because it was the A picture. They were both written by Takashi Kimura and Ishiro Honda, and they had music by Akira Ifukube. You know, these were the who's who of Toho Kaiju, right, of the 50s and 60s. But then you had this B team who were making two absolutely ridiculously joyful and certainly kid-friendly movies. This B team would produce Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster and Son of Godzilla, which were radical departures from the previous Godzilla movies in terms of presentation. And what's fascinating is that this B team was directed by Jun Fukuda, who does an expert job, and I think is one of the unsung heroes of Godzilla. Special effects by Eiichi Tsuburaya protege Sadamasa Arikawa, who was the predominant cinematographer for the special effects stuff before that. Written by the great Shinichi Sekizawa, who, even though it's kind of a massive generalization, but he was known for writing the more ridiculous, kid-friendly stuff. I mean, Mothra. Look at that right there. That's his masterpiece, is Mothra. And music by Masaru Sato, who, in my opinion, is kind of like the Ennio Morricone of Japan. And what radically different movies, despite them being in the same genre, right? Both War of the Gargantuas and King Kong Escapes has this air of reality to it, despite the ridiculousness of the films themselves, particularly King Kong Escapes. And they have kind of this dark, brooding element throughout the whole film. Meanwhile, you have Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster and Son of Godzilla, which are delightfully silly and campy movies that do not take themselves seriously at all and are wonderful because of it. Yes, I am a defender of Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. In fact, I agree with Stuart Galbraith's critique of the movie, where he says Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster is one of the few Godzilla movies where if you take Godzilla out of it, you still have a good movie. I agree. But War of the Gargantuas is definitely a much darker, more brooding movie in tone and execution than Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. I mean, you couldn't pick... It's the same studio, but you couldn't pick two more radically different movies. Right? You could not pick two radically different tonality movies than that. And I think one of the greatest ways you can look at this is the writing, right? The writers. Shinichi Sekizawa and Takashi Kimura were both interviewed by a Japanese newspaper, and this is according to David Callett. Granted, I don't know where he got this from, but I tend to believe him because he is a rather renowned film historian. But David Callett mentioned this, and I believe it was his audio commentary for either Ghidra the Three-Headed Monsters or Mothra. Both are two outstanding audio commentaries. And this interviewer asked, Shinichi Sekizawa and Takashi Kimura, do you guys really like writing these movies? And Shinichi Sekizawa eagerly said, I love it. It's a lot of fun. I love it. It's a lot of fun. Takashi Kimura then goes, not for me. See, he was over this come the mid-1960s. He'd written so many of these movies. Most of them are great. I think in terms of kaiju movies, specifically movies in which feature a giant monster, Rodan is Takashi Kimura's masterpiece. That movie is tremendously good. It's just a wonderful film. However, his true masterpiece, I think, is Matango, aka, which has the ridiculous subtitle in the U.S. called Attack of the Mushroom People. But that is a wonderful movie in which, tackles, drug addiction and stuff like that. And I think it's one of Ishiro Honda's best movies. And I think, this is the interesting thing. I think Ishiro Honda, as a director, worked better with somebody like Takashi Kimura because they both had a seriousness about their work. They both wanted to tell a bit of a more serious story than anything else. They took their projects, they at least tried to make them serious. While Shinichi Sekizawa didn't. He wanted to have fun. That was the most important element to a Shinichi Sekizawa script. Is it entertaining? Is it fun? And that's the big difference there. And in War of the Gargantuas, you can definitely tell it was Takashi Kimura and Ishiro Honda working on the script. because it's just a darker movie. And by darker, I don't mean like, oh, it's like Batman, where like everything's all dark and brooding and everything like that. No, I just mean the subject matter of the film is a little more serious and a little more maturely handled than what we'd see in the B pictures being made at this time. All right, so moving on. Oh, here's actually the comment that I wanted to mention. Here's one of the things. This is done by Brian Ridgway, U5G. He wrote, quote, everyone likes to slam Russ Tamblin's performance in War of the Gargantuas, but I appreciate how low-key... I appreciate his low-key, cool perspective. He is the unruffled American who provides the counterpart to the crazy monster action. His approach was very different than the dynamic interpretation provided by the great Nick Adams. But they are worlds apart. But that's what made them cool and unique. And that is a good take on it. I do kind of like that take. I wish I shared that take. But I'm glad that he certainly enjoys it. Let's see. The last time I saw Destroy All Monsters on TV, there were scenes and lines that cracked me up that I vividly remember. And quote for laughs as a kid that were missing or changed. One particular was when there's a television reporter waiting for the monsters to show up out on the countryside. And it says, quote, who will be the first on the battlefield? It's Godzilla. No, it's Godzilla's son. Too bad this stuff happens. Makes you doubt your own memories. But they were correct. These executive shenanigans wreck things. He's talking about the AIP dub. This is Mr. Stanley Milton. He's talking about the AIP dubs. And you're right, there are two different versions of the dub for Destroy All Monsters. There is the Frontier dub, which I kind of discussed earlier on in this one, and then there's the AIP-produced dub, which was what often played on television within the 1970s and 80s until it was released on home media in the 1990s. That's when the Frontier dub replaced it. The voice actor who dubs Russ Tamblyn is a man named Frank Mullen. Mullen dubbed many martial arts and kaiju movies throughout the mid-60s and early 70s. His most notable role in the Godzilla series was that of Dr. Yano in Godzilla vs. Hedorah. Outside of the Godzilla franchise, he's mainly remembered for his performances as the one-armed swordsman, and most infamously, the voice of Bruce Lee in the original dub of The Big Boss. So yeah, that was the other thing. If at all you are ever confused as to which version of War of the Gargantuas you're watching, and if you're watching the dubbed versions, if Russ Tamblyn if it's his actual voice, you're watching the UPA cut. If it's dubbed by somebody else, it is this international dub. Let's see what else we got here for some questions. Svengoolie shows the version from the early 70s with the original dubbing, with commercials. Still better than what this new and crummy dubbing. And that was commented by Thrashamal. Thrashamal, I think is how you pronounce it, or how you want to pronounce it. That is very true. I was genuinely shocked the last time War of the Gargantuas was played on television to discover that it was the UPA cut in widescreen, in proper scope, that was being played for Svengoolie. I was expecting it to be that horrible dub. But I remember when I unmuted it, I was at work when this happened. I was getting paid to watch this fucking movie. I was like, this is the UPA cut. Oh my God. I was shocked. That was the version that was being played. And if I remember correctly, I believe the print that they were using for Svengoolie was the print used by Classic Media. So if you ever watched Svengoolie when War of the Gargantuas were playing, you have seen the print that Classic Media had. Kind of fitting that, I'm drinking Monster and talking about the history of one of the greatest kaiju films of all time. Just looking at some of these comments. Actually, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to take a very short break here, because I have got to run to the restroom, and then I will be right back, and I'll gather some more of these comments and stuff like that. If you guys have any questions in the comments as well, feel free to go ahead and comment them. Eamon Sweeney 7399. I think I know who you are. In fact, I know who you are, and I appreciate you for being here. But you said in the comments, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm entertained. Well, I'm very glad for that, sir. Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you on the battlefield. Anyways, guys, we will be right back, and take care. I'll be right back. We interrupt your normal broadcast to bring you this brief message. ANP is proud to have become a HistoryFix affiliate. HistoryFix is a streaming service for history nerds like you and me. This includes some of our own productions, such as the uncut and uncensored version of our documentary on the Battle at Remagen, along with our short documentary breaking down the Boston Massacre moment by moment. So head on over using either the link on your screen right now, or by scanning the QR code, and save 30% off the annual subscription price by using the promo code 30% off. Thank you, and let's keep history alive. Oh my god. Enough of that song already, my god. Enough of that goddamn song. So here, I actually wanted to talk about this because I found this comment, and this is something that I made note of in my video discussing War of the Gargantuas. How disgusting, I had a burp. People may prefer the US cut and dub, but I want to see a pristine film print of the international English version. The one by Criterion-Janus Films uses the Toho print with Japanese titles and credits with a bad quality audio version and international dub. This was commented by SJ Drifter 72. You're right. That is one of the things that kind of drives me insane. It's one of the many things that drives me insane about the version that is readily available here on YouTube of War of the Gargantuas. It's not just the dub is bad. The print itself is bad. It's almost the opposite, right, of the classic media print of the Japanese version, which kind of has this dark blue hue over the whole thing. And again, I can pull it up here actually. Let me just make sure I got it here. Yep. Here you can kind of see it, right? Here's the US version. Here's the Japanese version of the US cut on the classic media DVD. It has this annoying blue hue over the whole thing that is just very distracting and makes the whole thing, the quality itself, just look kind of lackluster at best. Now, the version that is streaming on YouTube, and I believe is also streaming on the Criterion channel, it has this really dark green hue over the whole thing. So while the classic media print has a blue hue, and now we have a green one. And it makes several scenes utterly unwatchable because it's so dark. You can't see what's happening on screen. Now, that might work for something like Godzilla versus Hedorah, where the darkness really kind of hides the cheapness of the movie and ultimately kind of makes the fight itself a little creepier, that mixed with Richiro Manabe's score. But with War of the Gargantuas, you need to kind of tell which Gargantua you're supposed to be rooting for and which one you're not, right? And you can't really tell the difference between the brown and green. It is just a terrible rendition of the movie. And it just drives me nuts, especially when considering that the Toho Blu-ray that I have of War of the Gargantuas that I used extensively throughout my video, the quality is astonishing, and it's great. And it gets rid of those stupid slice marks at the bottom of the screen. The dubbing issue with War of the Gargantuas, this comment was by Mike Hunt, Mike Hunt, 4986, ha ha ha. The dubbing issue with War of the Gargantuas has also affected Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, Son of Godzilla, Destroy All Monsters, and Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster. The original English-language versions of those films that played on movie and television screens during the 20th century have all been replaced by vastly inferior international dubs produced by Toho. I refuse to watch them because Godzilla is all about nostalgia to me, and these are not the versions I grew up with. Thankfully, you can find fan restorations and versions of these movies, including War of the Gargantuas, on Internet Archive, in HD, and the original English dubs. You are incorrect, my cunt. I appreciate your comment, and I can understand that, because the AIP dubs, specifically the ones that you were referring to, well, War of the Gargantuas was done by a company called Glen Studios. Those versions do have the superior dubs. By far. They have vastly superior dubs, with some really great voice talent behind it, including Peter Fernandez and Paul Frees, right? Great voice talents. That being said, they are not the original English dubs, and I talked about this earlier as well. The original English dubs for these movies, believe it or not, are those international dubs. Those are the ones originally commissioned by Toho to be available for distributors over in the West. Those came out first. Once those versions reached Western shores, the distributors who bought the rights to those movies looked at those dubs and either said, sure, let's use them, like they did with Megalon, Gigan, Mechagodzilla, and Terror of Mechagodzilla. Those are the international dubs that we hear. Other companies, like for Sea Monster, Son of Godzilla, Destroy All Monsters, and Smog Monster, that was AIP. Those were all AIP, by the way. Decided to make their own better dub. And that's the one that you grew up watching on TV. Those were not the original dubs. We need to get the terminology right, and we need to get the credit due where they need to go. But yes, overall, I do agree with you. Those are vastly superior dubs, particularly the one for Destroy All Monsters. The dub for Destroy All Monsters the AIP dub, the one made by Titan, is very good. Do I think it's as good as Glen Studios for Monster Zero and War of the Gargantuas? No. But it is very good. Let's see. Excellent video. Also, the Janus film versions of so many Toho Kaiju films has jumps with most of the cuts, which is a problem with the A/B roll printing. It makes me crazy, and it does me as well. You're talking about those slice marks that you see at the bottom of your screen. This was commented by Greasy Films QC1XO. And I agree with you. I can't stand watching the Criterion cuts because of those slice marks. And this lasts all the way up through, I think the first film that it doesn't have those is Destroy All Monsters, but then all of a sudden they have them again with Hedorah. Hedorah and Megalon have those slice marks. The first film, Mechagodzilla and Terror Mechagodzilla don't. But all of the Godzilla movies on that release through the 1960s have those slice marks at the bottom of your screen, and they are so jarringly distracting. And that's just because when Toho released those prints, for some reason the mat was a little too wide. It was a little too open. Luckily, if you watch any of these 4K restorations that have come out of these movies, which if you haven't, please do. Oh my god, they are phenomenal. It corrected this problem. Even the classic media DVDs, they have the slice marks really bad too. And I really remember noticing it on the prints of Mothra vs. Godzilla and Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. I really noticed it. But yeah, luckily those are getting taken care of now. As bad as the Toho dub for War of the Gargantuas is, I am glad that it is at least resurfaced and is being archived. I agree with you. This was commented by DJ Funky Organic. I agree with you. As horrible, right? As horrible as I think that dub is. After all, I just made an entire video tearing it apart, and I'm kind of doing that here as well, answering all these questions. I am nevertheless happy it has resurfaced, because I remember when I first learned that there was an international dub for this movie, it was on an audio commentary by, I believe, Steve Ryfle, and he mentioned it, and I was like, oh, well, I'm curious to hear that. Just as like I'm kind of curious to hear the international dub for King Kong versus Godzilla. And we know that one exists because there is an international dub trailer that has been released, but the dub itself has never surfaced. That being said, because I believe that all of it should be archived and should be restored, because it's all, and this is the key thing here, it's all a part of the history of these movies, right? It's all a part of it, right? It's just like, and I believe I say this in the video as well, it's like all the cuts of Blade Runner. They're all available for you to consume. All the different cuts of Das Boot, if you're one of those military nerds that happen to stumble across this video. All of the cuts are readily available. You can watch whichever one you prefer, and they've all been pretty well restored. For other people, I'm so happy that Shout Factory, when they released their Blu-ray of King Kong 76, restored the television edit, which was around 30 minutes longer than the theatrical cut. And while I prefer the theatrical cut, I'm still very glad that the finally the television version, which I'd wanted to see forever, was restored, and it's now readily available to consume. So it's all a part of the history of the film. All of it should be archived, all of it should be readily available, and I would love to see all of it properly restored. So yeah, I have to agree with you there. I'm losing my voice. We're going to be ending this pretty soon, guys. Anyways, just because I'm exhausted and my voice is absolutely killing me. Let's see, looking through a couple of these. Larry1350 commented, the Gargantuas often referred to as spawns of Frankenstein, grown from the cells of Frankenstein from the original movie, Frankenstein Conquers the World. Would have been interesting if they kept that connection. Well, they do. In the Japanese version, they do keep that connection. It is the UPA cut that removes all references to Frankenstein completely, right, and calls them actual Gargantuas. Again, in the Japanese version, the kaiju get their own names, Sanda and Gaira. In the American version, they're called Gargantuas. They're called the brown and green Gargantuas. They don't have their own names, only in the Japanese version. So if you want that connection to Frankenstein, watch the Japanese version. speculation. This was done by OP Pig 1. Jesus Christ, you guys with your names. He actually has something here. He says, speculation. Nick Adams was dropped from War of the Gargantuas because of the drinking and womanizing that killed his U.S. career. That is true. That was partially what killed his U.S. career. He did have an affair with Kumi Mizuno during the invasion of Astro Monster. Tab Hunter was at the stage where he didn't mind losing jobs because some producer didn't want to work with him as a gay man. This is very true. Tab Hunter was originally slotted to play Russ Tamblin's role in War of the Gargantuas. And I think had Tab Hunter, who I think is just a better actor than Russ Tamblyn in general, I think he would have greatly improved War of the Gargantuas with his performance. But it was true. He was losing work because he was an openly gay man, quote unquote. Granted, I haven't read his autobiography. I want to. But he was an openly gay man working in Hollywood and Broadway in the 1960s and 1970s. Not something that you really would do. I mean, look at Rock Hudson, for example. He was definitely gay, died of AIDS, but he was always in the closet because he didn't want to ruin his career. However, I want to clarify something for you. Nick Adams did not have an affair with Kumi Mizuno. She was going to be married to somebody at that time. I don't know who, but she was engaged to be married in 1965, and she rebuffed his advances. So he did not have an affair with her. He was trying to have sexual relationships with Kumi Mizuno. I mean, any straight leading man at that time who wouldn't. Kumi Mizuno is absolutely gorgeous. But the affair never happened. So that just isn't true, and I want to clarify that as well. However, an interesting bit is that Nick Adams was also rumored to be gay. He was known as being a womanizer, trying to seduce all of the leading ladies in the movies that he played in and stuff like that. And he often did, but it is rumored that he was also one of those closeted gay actors, big actors in Hollywood, such as Anthony Perkins, Rock Hudson, Tab Hunter, Elvis Presley, believe it or not, James Dean, and Nick Adams, yeah. I have no idea the validity of that or not. There's no proof either way if Nick Adams was gay or not, other than that it was mentioned. People who don't know, Raymond Burr was gay. Raymond Burr actually had a partner for most of his life. But Raymond Burr was also gay, even though he would often used Natalie Wood. He was dating Natalie Wood for a long time, and he was using her as a beard, etc., etc., etc. But nobody would have known. Personally, I think if Nick Adams was actually gay, I think that could explain the overcompensation of womanizing. You know, he was really trying to hide it. One thing is for sure, Nick Adams was a very troubled man. That was for sure, and he did kill himself, right? He did commit suicide. But I don't think that's why Saperstein didn't want to get Nick Adams back. I don't think that had anything to do with it. It's just that a lot can happen in a year, and he just found another actor that could fit this role. He could get for relatively cheap, but also had name recognition, and that was Russ Tamblyn. Or Tab Hunter, and then it became Russ Tamblyn. So there. Just wanted to address that. Let's see. Okay. So I think I'm getting down to the nitty-gritty here. If I wanted to purchase a copy of the movie, do you suggest a particular production copy that one could currently get to have the best dub? Yeah, get the classic media one. This was asked by Laurel and Wright 4780. Yes, the classic media DVD. is what you want. And it's a double feature with Rodan, and both Rodan and War of the Gargantuas features the alternate US cut and the original Japanese version. So if you're going to get one, that's what I recommend that you get. Granted, I believe the DVDs are... actually, I don't believe. I know. They are out of print now, and they're probably going to cost you a good penny. But if you really want it, and if you're more a computer-savvy guy like me, maybe check out the Internet Archive. Yes, it is also correct that Toho did the international dubs for The Return of Godzilla and the remaining Heisei Godzilla film. Yes, that was the same Hong Kong dubbing team that did those, as well as the movies from the 2000s. They also dubbed those. Let's see. This is a good one. RJ Godzilla 81 says, it's interesting that Toho didn't object to the American versions of these movies until after Tomoyuki Tanaka had passed away. That's not true. Toho didn't object to these versions of the movies being made simply because they were making Toho a lot of money. That is simply it. They didn't really care. And in fact, there's ample evidence to show that people like Ishiro Honda were touched that these movies were kind of being re-edited for audiences in the West, because people like Ishiro Honda and a lot of Japanese, filmmakers in general had the wrong opinion that, and this always kind of drives me nuts, that their movies are simply too Japanese for Western audiences, therefore they needed to be altered for us to possibly understand them. And that is a completely ridiculous opinion to have, but it is a prevailing view in Japan to this day. And I just don't get it. But back then, it was still there. And so there's actually a lot of praise for the U.S. versions. In fact, Ishiro Honda, when he was tasked to recut Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, looked at the U.S. re-edit of the movie and copied much of the re-edits done in that film to make his new cut of the film, in terms of structure and everything like that. So, I don't think Tomoyuki Tanaka had anything to do with it. It was just the way how Toho is. That's just how they work. So really, Toho didn't really care back then, because these movies were making them a lot of money and giving them a lot of world recognition. They're very proud of these movies, as they should have been. They were a factory. Toho was certainly a factory in the 1960s. I mean, look at 1964. In 1964, the same writers, same director, same special effects guy, and same music composer worked on 3 kaiju movies in a row. 3. Mothra vs. Godzilla, Dogora the Space Monster, and then finally Ghidra the Three-Headed Monsters. And 2 out of those 3 movies are gargantuan class. They are gargantuan. They are both classics, right? They are both utter classics, and I think that's a testament to the artistry and imagination of the crew involved. They had pride in their movies, justifiably so. They had a lot of pride in their movies, and these giant monster movies, these sci-fi flicks, were now starting to be pumped out left and right. And the bubble would occur in 1967, when that was the peak. To me, the success of these movies really peaked in 1964 with Ghidra the Three-Headed Monster, which was a huge hit. Huge hit. Rightfully so. The movie's absolutely amazing and ludicrous in every way, and it's phenomenal because of that. But in 1967, all 5 of the major Japanese studios released a kaiju film, right? Look at Toho. Toho in 1967 released 2. They released Son of Godzilla and King Kong Escape, movies we discussed earlier, right? Daiei released Gamera vs. Gauss. Nikatsu released Gappa, the Triphibian monster, which had special effects by a guy named Akira Watanabe, who was a former Eiji Tsuburaya employee. He was the former art director for Eiji Tsuburaya. For Shochiku, a company known mainly for dramas, they produced the wonderfully ludicrous X from Outer Space, or Ilala the Space Monster. And then Toei distributed Yongari Monster from the Deep, which was granted a South Korean movie, but they distributed it over here in the United States. And they were also releasing, I think it was Giant Robo, on television. So all 5 of the major studios in Japan had their hands that year in kaiju affairs. So it shows you just how big these movies were. You know, come 1966, you had the year War of the Gargantuas was released in 1966. You had let's see here. You had War of the Gargantuas, Son of Godzilla. Over Daiei, you had all 3 Daimajin movies, plus you had Gamera versus Barugun, right? And I believe we may have had the Yokai Monster movies too coming out from Daiei too. So Toho no longer had a monopoly over kaiju come the 1960s, right? Mothra, one reason why a movie like Mothra in 1961 could have such a large budget and had such a large scale was because no one was making these movies other than Toho at that time. They had the monopoly over that genre, right? And it proved to be successful for them for a long time. But then the business model started changing, particularly in 1965 when Daiei made Gamera, and Gamera, much to Toho's chagrin, was a gargantuan success. Say what you will about the movie, but the movie itself was a giant hit. And suddenly Toho started adopting this new mentality that, well, instead of putting more resources into one big movie, right, maybe we can pour half the resources into 2 movies. And so that's one reason why we started getting this A and B team within 1966 and 1967. They would start making more of these science fiction movies for less money. And therefore, the pie would be a little bit more distributed. So let's say one of them bombs. Well, chances are this other one will make, decent money and make up for it or cover any losses that might have come from that other movie. Sort of distributing the pie a little bit. So that came about largely because Toho finally lost its monopoly over the genre. I couldn't believe it actually took that long. If you really look at it, it literally took until 1965, over 10 years after the original Godzilla movie to be released, for another company to even remotely think of dipping their toes into making another giant monster movie. And some of that, I think, is because Toho is ravenous when it comes to their protection of their stuff. And, for example, the reason why the writer Shinichi Sekizawa, which we talked about before, one of the reasons why he was brought on to Toho in the first place was because he was partially responsible for, he wrote the script for what was going to be a television show called Aegon, the Atomic Dragon. He wrote the script to it. And that was going to be released, I believe, in 1958, if I remember correctly. Either that or it was I think it was 1958. Something like that. Toho then sued the distributors of it and the makers of Aegon and effectively shelved that movie until the late 60s. But in the process of that, they did get their hands on Shinichi Sekizawa, who would then write Varan the Unbelievable, a rather subpar kaiju movie, but it showed that Shinichi Sekizawa knew what he was doing and that he could write something and write something very quick and have it be competent. So yeah, so maybe that's one reason why other studios in Japan were kind of afraid to make their own kaiju films, was because they were afraid Toho was just going to utterly destroy them. But 1965 happened, Gamera gets released, and suddenly the floodgates are wide open. Wide open. And the company that really excelled at this was Toei. Toei just excelled at their tokusatsu stuff, particularly in television. Honestly, the amount of stuff that Toei, the television Toei Television was doing blows everything in terms of the maybe not in terms of quality, but in terms of the amount, just the sheer amount of stuff that they were pumping out, blows Super Riot Productions right out of the water. Say what you want about Supaida Man. All right. Well, it appears I have answered all of the questions. I believe I've answered all of those. So I'm actually going to wrap this up. Thank you all for attending, or for listening to me ramble on for 2 hours about War of the Gargantuas and answering a lot of these questions that came about because of that original video that I made. Hopefully this would answer some of those questions. And, you know, I always enjoy talking about movie history or film history in general, but especially kaiju film history. I just really enjoy, because I really respect the filmmakers and everything behind them. And I think it's just a fun topic to kind of talk about and digest. And, well, I thank y'alls for tuning in. Again, it's fucking Christmas, everybody. Merry Christmas to everybody out there. Happy holidays if you're not a Christian or you don't celebrate Christmas. Happy holidays to you. Also, a Happy New Year. Some big announcements coming to AN Productions come January. And you'll see a little teaser of that if you go onto my channel right now and scroll down to the bottoms and check out my other channel, or my other channels. You get a little teaser of what's coming down there. But again, thank you so much for joining. It was an absolute blast getting to talk about this again. I haven't been able to really talk about kaiju film history in quite a while, mainly because the videos haven't been doing well. This is just something that I wanted to put out there, and I was so happy to see it take off as much as it did. So again, thank you very much, and again, Merry Christmas. If you haven't subscribed, please do. It's just going to help the channel grow so I can make more content like this, and I can just gush over my love of history in general. You know. And again, I'm Adam Noyes. AN Productions is a channel dedicated to military history, film history, and history in general. Today, we were talking film history, and so I look forward to talking to you guys later and seeing you guys around. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, everybody, and take care. Thanks for tuning in. We interrupt your normal broadcast to bring you this brief message. ANP is proud to have become a HistoryFix affiliate. HistoryFix is a streaming service for history nerds like you and me. This includes some of our own productions, such as the uncut and uncensored version of our documentary on the Battle at Remagen, along with our short documentary breaking down the Boston Massacre moment by moment. So head on over using either the link on your screen right now, or by scanning the QR code, and save 30% off the annual subscription price by using the promo code 30% off. Thank you, and let's keep history alive.